Clearing the last table of the night, Elijah Brooks, a waiter who had once been the top economics student in his class, went still when he saw the receipt, $0 in tip. A coworker laughed out loud and held the slip up so the whole floor could see it. Then Elijah lifted the plate and found a slip of paper folded carefully underneath. The first line made his hand shake. "Do you still remember me?" Who was the woman who had just walked out of the restaurant? And why had she left that message instead of money? The Aldridge sat on the 22nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago, and everything about it was designed to remind people what they could afford. The floors were polished stone, the water was poured from bottles with foreign labels, and the windows looked out over a grid of lights that made the city seem smaller than it was. Elijah Brooks had worked there for 2 years, 4 nights a week, and he still had not gotten used to the sound the room made when it was full, that low, expensive hum of people who never checked a price. He was 37. He wore the same black uniform as everyone else pressed himself because the restaurant charged $8 a week for laundry service, and he had done the math on that a long time ago. He knew the wine list by heart. He knew which tables ran cold in winter and which regulars wanted their glasses filled before they noticed they were empty. He was good at the job in a way that most people in the room would never register because being good at it meant being invisible. 15 years earlier, he had been someone else entirely. At Northfield University, he had been the student professors used as an example, the one who finished the economics problem sets before the section met and then stayed after to walk other people through them. There had been a graduate fellowship on the table. There had been a research position at a firm in New York that had already sent the paperwork. Then his mother's diagnosis came, and after that the second mortgage, and after that the hospital billing office with its calm voice and its payment plans that were not plans at all. He left school in the middle of his final year. He told himself it was temporary. It was the kind of thing a person could believe for 6 months, then for 2 years, and then not at all. What followed was a list of jobs he did not put on any resume. Warehouse loading, overnight stocking, a call center in a strip mall where the supervisor timed bathroom breaks. Each one paid enough to keep the lights on and cost him a little more of the version of himself he used to be. By the time he took the position at the Aldridge, he had stopped explaining his past to anyone. Explaining it only made people uncomfortable, and discomfort did not tip well. Marcus Reed ran the night shift. He was in his 40s, built like a man who had played football badly in high school, and he had a habit of standing behind his staff while they worked, so they could feel him there. He liked Elijah's numbers and disliked Elijah's manner, which he described once to Walter Pruitt, the general manager, as thinking he's above the floor. Elijah had heard it through the pass-through window and had gone back to folding napkins. Walter, who had hired Elijah himself and reviewed every timesheet in the building, had not agreed and had not argued either. Danny Whitaker had been there 3 months and had already decided who he was better than. He was 26, loud in the break room and smooth on the floor, and he had a theory about every guest before they finished sitting down. He called Elijah Professor the first week after Elijah corrected a wine year, and it had stuck in the way cruel things do when nobody stops them. The only person who spoke to Elijah like a person was Nora Bennett, who ran the expediting station and had worked in kitchens since before Danny was born. She kept a stool by the pass for the servers who needed 30 seconds off their feet, and she never asked anyone why they needed it. When Elijah came through with an order, she read his face the way she read a ticket, quickly and without comment. On a Thursday in late October, the reservation book had a name on it in Marcus Reed's handwriting, underlined twice. Claire Montgomery, party of 1 8 o'clock corner window. The staff meeting before service ran twice as long as usual. Marcus explained who she was as if none of them owned a phone. Montgomery Capital managed something in the range of $40 billion. She had been on the cover of 2 business magazines that year. She had bought a building 9 blocks east and gutted it. Marcus said the word discretion 4 times and then assigned her table to Elijah, which surprised no one because Elijah never spilled anything and never talked too much. Danny took it personally anyway. In the service corridor, he said the table should have been his, that Marcus had given away the biggest tip of the quarter to a man who would probably thank her for it in Latin. Nora told him to pick up his plates. He picked up his plates. Claire Montgomery arrived at 3 minutes past 8 alone in a gray coat she handed off without looking at who took it. She was tall and unhurried. She did not scan the room for people who might recognize her, which was itself a kind of recognition. She already knew nobody would approach her here because the Aldridge's entire business model was pretending not to notice. Elijah brought the water and the menu and gave the greeting he had given 10,000 times. She looked up at him then, and something in her face moved and settled. "Thank you," Claire said. She held the look one beat past comfortable. "Sparkling, please." He went to get it. He thought nothing of it. Wealthy guests stared. It was part of the job being looked at by people trying to decide whether you were competent. But it kept happening. She ordered the scallops and the duck and a glass of the burgundy, and every time he came back to the table, he found her watching him, not his hands, not the plate, his face. When he described the dish, she listened with an attention that had nothing to do with food. Twice he caught her looking at the name tag pinned above his pocket, which read only Brooks. She asked him one question that did not fit the evening. "Have you worked here long?" Claire said. Elijah gave the answer he always gave, that it had been about 2 years, and asked whether she wanted the duck brought out with the second glass or after. She said after. She did not ask him anything else. By the second hour, the floor had noticed. Danny leaned against the station and said she was sizing him up, that some of them liked to see how far they could push before you cracked. Marcus circled the table 3 times without a reason. Nora watched from the pass and said nothing at all. Elijah kept his rhythm. He cleared the fish course from the left. He did the work. Once between courses, Claire got up to take a call and walked the length of the room to do it past the host stand, where a pad of the restaurant's notepaper sat beside the reservation book. She was gone about 4 minutes. When she came back, she sat with her hands in her lap for a while before she picked up her glass. At 10:40, she asked for the check. He brought it in the leather folder and set it down and stepped back the correct distance. She signed without reading the itemization, which most of them did, and she slid the folder to the edge of the table and stood. "It was a good evening," Claire said. She put her hand briefly on the back of the chair. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks." He said good night. She walked to the coat stand, took her coat, and went. The elevator doors closed on the gray of it, and the room went back to its hum. Danny got to the folder first. He always did. Elijah was 3 steps behind him when Danny opened it, and he watched the man's face change from anticipation into something worse than disappointment, into delight. The bill came to $216. On the tip line, she had written a single figure, 0. The total matched the subtotal exactly in clean, deliberate handwriting. Danny laughed once sharp and held the slip up so the 2 servers at the next station could see it. He said something about 4 hours of the best service in the building and not $1 for it. He said the word professor and let it sit there. Marcus came over, took the slip, read it twice, and handed it back without expression. He said tables were tables and told them to reset the section. That was the part Elijah would remember later, not the number, but the silence that followed it. The other servers looked at him and then looked away fast, the way people do at a funeral. He had been humiliated in that restaurant before. He had been asked for the manager because a guest wanted someone who understood the wine. He had been handed coats. None of it had felt like this because none of it had been public in exactly this way, in front of a room of people who had spent the whole night telling each other how much this table was going to be worth. He said nothing. He picked up the bin and went to the corner window and began clearing. Glasses first, then the flatware, then the small plate she had used for bread. He stacked the dinner plate and lifted it, and underneath, pressed flat against the white cloth where the base of the plate had hidden it completely, was a folded slip of paper. It was the restaurant's own notepaper from the pad kept by the host stand. Folded once edges lined up, corners squared. Somebody had taken time with it. He set the plate down. He opened it. "Do you still remember me, Claire?" His hand moved. He was aware of it moving and could not stop it, the paper shaking slightly between 2 fingers while his mind went backward through 15 years fast like a page flipping. Northfield. A lecture hall with 200 seats. The 3rd row left side, a girl who came in late every Monday because her shift at the campus bookstore ran until 10 past. She had failed the first midterm in intermediate microeconomics and had come to the study group he ran in the basement of the library, not because she was slow, but because she was tired, and she had told him once, sitting across a table at 2 in the morning with a cup of vending machine coffee, that she was going to have to leave school because she could not do both the work and the money. He had told her she could. He had told her the exact thing he had needed someone to tell him, and he had rearranged his own week so the study group met on the 2 nights she was free. Claire. She had worn a bookstore lanyard and had cut her own hair. She had not looked like a person who would ever be described in a magazine. Elijah stood at that table for a long time with the note in his hand. Nora found him there. She looked at the paper, then at his face, and asked if he was all right. He folded the note along the crease she had made and put it in his shirt pocket and told her he was fine. He carried the bin to the kitchen. He finished his section. He did not tell anyone because telling Danny Whitaker that the billionaire had left him a message instead of money would have sounded out loud exactly like a man inventing a reason not to feel small. He clocked out at 20 past midnight and rode the train home to a one-bedroom on the west side with a radiator that knocked. He sat on the edge of the bed with his shoes still on and read the 6 words again under the lamp. At 12:51, his phone lit up with a number he did not know. Elijah, I hope the note reached you and not someone else. If you're willing, I'll be at Kessler's Coffee on Wabash at 9 this morning. I'd like to talk. No agenda. CM. He read it maybe 20 times. The first thing he felt was not warmth. It was shame arriving fast and complete the way it always did. She had sat in that chair for 2 hours watching him carry plates. She had watched him recite the preparation of a duck breast. She had watched him step back the correct distance and wait to be dismissed. Whatever she remembered of the person in the library basement, she had spent the entire evening measuring it against the man in the black uniform. And the note was the result of that arithmetic. He thought about the 0 on the tip line, and the shame turned briefly into something hotter. She could have written the note and left $300. She could have done both. Instead, she had left him standing in front of his own coworkers holding an empty folder while Danny Whitaker laughed. Either she had not thought about it at all, which was its own kind of answer about how people like her saw people like him, or she had thought about it very carefully, and he could not work out why. He set the phone face down and looked at the wall for a while. There were reasons not to go. A woman like that did not reach across 15 years without wanting something, and the only things he had left to give were his time and his dignity, and he was running low on one of them. If it was pity, he would see it on her face in the first 30 seconds, and he would have to sit there and be gracious about it because that was what he had trained himself to be. If it was some kind of joke, a story to tell at a dinner party, "You'll never guess who served me," he would rather never know. And under all of it, the reason he did not say out loud, even to himself, she had known him when he was the best in the room. Going to that coffee shop meant sitting down across from the only person alive who could measure exactly how far he had fallen because she was the one who still held the original number. He picked up the phone at 1 in the morning and typed a reply and deleted it. He typed a second one and deleted that too. Then he thought about the way she had folded the paper. Squared corners, edges, a line tucked under the base of a plate so that nobody would find it except the person who cleared the table. That was not the gesture of someone tossing a coin at a stranger. That was the gesture of someone who did not want an audience for it. He thought about the fact that she had signed it with her first name only the way she would have signed a note left on a library table at 2 in the morning. He typed a third message and sent it before he could delete it. "I'll be there, EB." The reply came in under a minute. Good. Corner table in the back. Elijah put the phone down and looked at his hands, which were cracked across the knuckles from hot water and had not held a pen for anything but an order pad in a very long time. He had no idea what he was going to say to her. He had no idea what a man in his position could possibly say to a woman in hers that would not sound like an apology. He set an alarm for 7. He hung the black uniform on the back of the door for the coming night's shift, because whatever happened at 9 in the morning, he was expected at 4. Then he lay down in the dark with the note on the nightstand beside him, and for the first time in longer than he wanted to count, he could not sleep for a reason that was not money. Kessler's Coffee on Wabash was the kind of place that had been there before the neighborhood got expensive and had survived by refusing to change anything. Elijah arrived at 4 minutes to 9 wearing the only jacket he owned that still fit correctly and found her already in the corner table at the back, no coat, no phone on the table, 2 cups in front of her. Claire Montgomery looked different in daylight, less arranged. She stood when he came over, which he had not expected, and she put out her hand and he shook it. "You still take it black," Claire said, pushing 1 cup toward him. "I guessed. If I'm wrong, I'll buy you another." He sat down. He did not touch the cup. "You knew," Elijah said. "Last night. You knew when you walked in." "I knew when you set the water down." Claire wrapped both hands around her own cup. "Not the name. I couldn't see the name tag from that angle. It was your voice. You have a way of finishing a sentence like you're leaving room for the other person to disagree with you. Nobody else does that." He looked at the table. 15 years of preparation for this conversation, and he had not prepared for that. "I sat there for 2 hours trying to make it not be true," she said. "I ran through every reason it might be somebody who looked like you. I ordered a second course I didn't want, so I'd have more time. You could have just asked. In front of your manager, in front of the 4 people watching that table like it was a horse race. Claire shook her head. If I'd said your name out loud in that room, you'd have had to be someone in front of them. I didn't want to make you do that. Elijah turned the cup a half rotation on the table without lifting it. So you left me a 0. I left you a note. You left me a 0 on a tip line and a note nobody else could see. He kept his voice level because he had trained his voice for 15 years, and it was the last thing he owned that never slipped. Do you know what happened after you got in the elevator? A 26-year-old named Danny Whitaker held that slip up so the whole floor could look at it. He's been calling me professor since my first week. He had a very good night. Something crossed her face and stayed there. I didn't think that far. No, I mean it. I'm not going to tell you it was strategy. Claire set the cup down. I had one thought, which was that if I left money, you would think it was for the service and you would never turn the plate over. And I had about 90 seconds to decide. I chose badly and it cost you something and I'm sorry. He had come in ready for pity and had gotten an apology instead, which was harder to defend against. You were the best student in that department, she said. Not one of, the best. Professor Halloran used to grade against you and everyone knew it. So I need to ask, and I'm going to ask it once and then I'll leave it alone. What happened? Elijah had not told it to anyone in a decade. He told it in about 4 minutes flat, the way a man reads out a series of dates. He gave her the shape of it, the diagnosis, the coverage that stopped at a threshold nobody explained until they crossed it, the withdrawal form in the registrar's office that took less than a minute and did not require a reason. Then he gave her the part he had never said out loud. She died in April, he said. I had it in my head that when it was over, I'd go back. Fall semester, maybe spring. What I didn't understand at 22 is that the balance doesn't die with the patient. It just changes whose name is on it. By the time I had it cleared, I was 31 years old and I hadn't opened a textbook in 9 years and there was nothing left to go back to. Claire listened without moving. She did not do the thing he had braced for, which was to make a sound of sympathy. How long at the restaurant? 2 years. It's the best job I've had since I left. That's not a joke. I believe you. She turned her cup around once. I want you at Montgomery Capital. He had known it was coming from the moment he sat down, and he still felt the floor tilt. Let me say this carefully, because it matters, Claire said. There's a seat open on the portfolio analytics team. It's posted. It's been posted for 11 days, and it closes at the end of next week. I am not offering it to you. I'm telling you it exists, and I'm asking you to apply for it. Elijah looked up. You'd go through that panel like everyone else, she said. I won't sit on it. I won't see the scores until after they're recorded. The director who runs that group is named Grant Hollis, and he has never once let me put anybody on his team, which is the single best thing about him. If he says no, it's no, and I won't touch it. No, Elijah said. You haven't heard the number. The number isn't the problem. He leaned back. Claire, look at me. I haven't opened a regression in 15 years. I don't know your software. I don't know your models. The people on that team came out of programs I didn't finish, and they've been doing it since they were 22. Everything I was good at in 2009. You think the math changed? I think I changed. He said it without heat, which made it worse. You remember a person who could do things? That person's gone. He got spent. I'm not going to walk into your building and let you find that out in front of everybody, and I'm not going to let you carry me because of a study group in a library basement. Claire took that. She did not argue for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had gone somewhere cooler and more precise, and he recognized it as the voice she must use in rooms he would never be in. I want to be clear about something, she said. This is not gratitude. If I hired every person who was ever kind to me at Northfield, I'd have a payroll problem and no returns. So let me tell you what I'm actually buying. She held up one finger. In 2009, I sat down at your table because I had failed a midterm and I was 3 weeks from withdrawing. You did not tell me I was smart. You told me the exact hour of the exact week where my schedule was broken, and then you moved your own study group to Wednesdays and Sundays because those were the only nights I wasn't working. You never once said you'd moved it. I found out from someone else 2 months later. That's not a job qualification. It's the only one I can't teach. Claire folded her hands. I have $40 billion under management, and I have people who can build any model you want. What I don't have enough of are people who look at a broken thing and find the actual mechanism instead of the story everyone's agreed to tell about it. Everything else, the software, the models, the way we do things, that's 90 days. I'm not offering you a favor. I'm telling you, a door is open for 9 more days and asking you to walk through it on your own legs." Elijah did not answer. "Take the week," she said. She stood, put a card on the table, and did not shake his hand this time. "If it's still no on Friday, it's no, and I'll never bring it up again. And Elijah, I meant what I said about last night. Whatever you decide, I'm going to fix that with your management." "Don't," he said. "That would make it worse." She looked at him for a moment and then nodded once and left. He went back to the Aldridge that afternoon at 4 and worked the shift. Danny asked loudly whether the professor had made his rent. Nora Bennett put a plate of family meal in front of him at 6 and did not ask anything at all, which was why he told her. She heard the whole thing standing up wiping down her station, and when he finished, she said the only thing anybody said to him that week that actually landed. "You've been telling everybody in here for 2 years that you're not what this job says you are," Nora said. "Now somebody agrees with you. Funny how that's the part you can't take." He thought about it for 5 nights. He thought about it on the train and in the walk-in cooler where it was quiet and at 2 in the morning with the radiator knocking. What he kept returning to was not the salary. It was that he had spent 15 years constructing a very careful explanation for his own life, and Claire Montgomery had sat across a table and declined to accept it, and he did not have a second explanation ready. On Thursday, he submitted the application through the public portal, the same one the other 40 candidates used. He wrote the 15 years down honestly: warehouse, overnights, call center, restaurant, because there was no way to write them dishonestly that would survive 10 minutes of checking. The panel interview was the following Tuesday morning at 8, which meant he came off a closing shift, slept 4 hours, and rode downtown in the dark. 3 people sat across from him. Grant Hollis ran it and asked the technical questions, and for the first 11 minutes, Elijah was certain he was going to be sick. Then Grant put a reconciliation problem on the whiteboard. 2 systems incompatible identifiers, a mismatch. Nobody could source, and asked how he'd approach it. Elijah looked at it and felt something turn over in his chest that he had not felt since a basement in a library, and he said the mismatch was probably not in the data, and he explained why, and he was still explaining 8 minutes later when Grant stopped writing. The offer came 9 days after that. There was one condition, and it was his own. Elijah asked in writing to be brought in below the standard analyst band and to stay there until a performance review said otherwise. Human Resources had no mechanism for a candidate requesting less money. It took a signed compensation exception from the chief executive to process it, which was the only piece of paper in the file that ever carried Claire Montgomery's initials. He gave the Aldridge 2 weeks. Marcus Reed took the notice, read it, and asked what firm. When Elijah told him, Marcus laughed and said sure, and then stopped laughing about 4 seconds later when he understood that it was not a joke, and after that he was awkward around Elijah for the entire 2 weeks. Walter Pruitt shook his hand on the last night and said the restaurant had been getting more than it paid for. Montgomery Capital occupied 9 floors of a building on West Monroe. On the first Monday of December, Elijah walked in through a lobby with a security desk and a badge scanner and stood in an elevator with people who all seemed to know each other's coffee orders. By 10 that morning, everyone on the 28th floor knew who he was, and not one of them had it right. He heard the pieces of it over the following days, the way a person always hears these things, half a sentence in a corridor, a subject that changed when he sat down. Somebody in operations had seen the compensation exception and noticed the chief executive's initials on it. Somebody else had run his name and found no firm history. No analyst tracked nothing at all for 15 years. Somebody in the elevator had heard him say honestly where he had worked before. By Wednesday, the version in circulation was that Claire Montgomery had hired a waiter she knew personally into a team of people with graduate degrees. Nobody said it to his face. That was the thing that took getting used to. At the restaurant, contempt had been loud. Danny Whitaker had made a performance of it. Here, it was structural. A distribution list he was not on for 6 weeks. A senior associate named Blake Ferris who reviewed his first submission and returned it with the note, "Let's have someone with modeling experience take a second pass," copying 2 people above them both. Nobody on that floor knew that his name still sat on a plaque in a hallway at Northfield, or that he had finished 3.5 years of the program with the highest cumulative average in his cohort, or that the reason there was no degree attached to it was a hospital billing office in 2009. It was not in the story. The story was cleaner without it. Grant Hollis ran portfolio analytics and had run it for 9 years. He was 51, meticulous, and well-liked by the people he had personally promoted. He had scored Elijah first on technical reasoning in the panel and had signed off on the hire without hesitation. What he had not known until the compensation exception crossed his desk was that the chief executive had any idea who the candidate was. He said nothing about it. He never raised his voice at Elijah either. He did something more effective. He gave him work. The first assignment was a full reconciliation of the middle market credit book 1,200 positions across 4 legacy systems that had never been properly merged with 3 different naming conventions and a decade of manual overrides. It was the kind of task that was handed to new analysts as a hazing ritual and to unwanted analysts as a slow execution. Grant gave him 9 days and mentioned in the meeting that it usually took a team of 3 about a month. Elijah did not argue. He had spent 2 years memorizing a wine list and the temperature of every table in a dining room, and he understood better than anyone in that room what it meant to be handed a task designed to make you fail quietly. He came in at 6:30 in the morning. He rebuilt the reconciliation from the definitions up rather than the data down because the data was not the problem. The problem was that 4 systems had been asked over 10 years to answer 4 slightly different questions. He wrote the mapping by hand before he wrote a single line of code. He asked the operations group for the archived documentation from the 2022 migration, and a woman there dug it out of a shared drive nobody had opened in 3 years. He delivered on the 7th day. The reconciliation cleared at 99.4%, and the remaining 0.6 were not errors. They were 16 positions that had been double-counted since that migration, which meant the credit book had been carrying an overstatement in client reporting for nearly 3 years. Grant Hollis read the memo in a room with 4 other directors present. He said good and moved to the next item on the agenda. The next assignment was harder. So was the one after that. Over the winter, Elijah was given the drawdown attribution. Nobody wanted a client reporting rebuild with a compressed timeline and a stress test rerun for a committee meeting that had been moved up by 6 days. He delivered all 3. The third one surfaced a discrepancy in how the firm's second-largest fund was reporting a hedged position, and the correction moved a number that people above Grant Hollis cared about. It should have made things easier. It did the opposite. A man who cannot do the work is a problem that solves itself. A man who can do the work and who appears to have come in through a door nobody else was allowed to use is a permanent argument about fairness, and the longer he succeeds, the sharper the argument gets. Blake Ferris had been passed over for the drawdown project. He had 2 degrees and 6 years and a promotion timeline that Elijah's arrival had visibly disturbed. In March, the story mutated into something with teeth. Elijah learned the details later in the way you learn about a thing already in motion. It started at a Thursday happy hour and reached the compliance inbox the following week, an anonymous submission stating that an analyst had been placed on the portfolio team through a personal relationship with the chief executive outside the standard process, and that assignments had subsequently been steered to him. It used the phrase preferential placement. It did not use Elijah's name, because it did not have to. Peter Almond had been on the Montgomery Capital Board for 9 years and had a reputation for procedural rigor that some people admired and others found convenient. He read the submission and requested in writing that Human Resources conduct an open review of the hiring in question to be presented to the board on the last Friday of the month. Elijah heard about it from Vanessa Cole in Human Resources, who told him because she thought he should not find out in the room. He went back to his desk and sat there while the floor emptied. He understood with a clarity that felt almost restful that it was going to happen exactly as it had happened before. Not one line of the review would concern the reconciliation or the 16 double-counted positions or the hedge correction. The review would concern where he had come from. They would put 15 years of warehouses and overnight shifts and a black uniform on a table in front of a board, and the board would look at it and reach the conclusion the 28th floor had reached on his first Monday. And Claire would have to sit in that room and defend a decision she had deliberately kept her hands off. Whatever the outcome, the sentence that would follow her afterward was that she had hired a waiter because she used to know him. He had cost her nothing yet. That was still true on a Thursday night in March, and he did not intend for it to stop being true. He opened a blank document at 8:40 in the evening and wrote 4 sentences. He thanked the firm for the opportunity, tendered his resignation effective, immediately stated that his departure was voluntary and unrelated to any pending inquiry, and signed it. Then he sat looking at the screen with his finger over the key in a building where the lights were still on, and every desk around him was empty, and did not send it. He did not send it that night, and he did not send it the next morning either. He printed it instead, folded it once, and carried it in his jacket pocket for 8 days, which meant that on the last Friday of March he walked into the boardroom on the 31st floor with a resignation letter against his chest and no intention of speaking. The room held 9 directors: Grant Hollis, Vanessa Cole from Human Resources, and Peter Almond at the far end with a folder squared in front of him. Blake Ferris sat along the wall, not at the table present because Peter had asked for someone from the floor who could speak to how the assignments had been distributed. Claire Montgomery sat at the head of the table and did not look at Elijah when he came in, which he understood and did not resent. Peter Almond opened by describing the submission without naming its author, and then made the case in the reasonable, unhurried voice of a man who believed he was protecting an institution. The concern, he said, was not the individual. The concern was that a hiring file had carried the chief executive's initials at a level where they did not belong, that the candidate had no prior industry history, and that assignments of unusual visibility had followed. He said the firm could not maintain a promotion standard for 200 people and an exception for 1. Blake Ferris spoke from the wall when he was invited to. He said that people on his team had spent years earning the right to be in the room, and that if the answer was that the chief executive could simply place someone, then nothing they had been told about the process was true. He asked that the placement be reviewed, and if it failed, that the seat be reposted. 2 directors agreed. A third said the matter should at minimum go to a formal audit. Somewhere in the middle of it, Elijah stopped hearing the individual sentences and heard only the shape of the thing, which was the same shape as a hospital billing office in 2009 and a supervisor timing a bathroom break and a guest at table 14 asking for someone who understood the wine. He had his hand on the folded paper in his pocket when Claire spoke. "Before anyone votes," she said, "I want to say what I am not going to do. I am not going to sit here and tell you to trust my judgment. That's the argument every executive makes when they don't want the file opened, and it's the argument Peter is right to refuse." She turned to the woman on her left. "Vanessa, unseal the file. All of it. Distribute to every seat." Vanessa Cole stood and passed folders down both sides of the table. "There are 4 things in there," Claire said. "The complete requisition and interview record, the candidate's academic transcript released with his written permission this morning. 3 references, and the performance record from December through last week, which nobody in this room requested and which I am adding anyway." Peter Almond opened his folder. The room went quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when the paper is not saying what everyone expected. The requisition was ordinary. The seat had been posted publicly for 24 days. 41 candidates applied. 4 were interviewed by a 3-person panel chaired by Grant Hollis, who scored this one first on technical reasoning and first overall. The chief executive's initials appeared exactly once in the entire file on a compensation exception, a downward one placing the hire below the standard analyst band, requested in writing by the candidate himself and dated before the offer was accepted. "I'd like everyone to sit with that for a second," Claire said. "The single act of favoritism in this file is that I signed off on paying him less than he was entitled to because he asked me to, and because our system had no other way to process a man who wanted to be underpaid until he'd proven something." The transcript was 3 pages. Northfield University Economics, 2005 through 2009. 3.5 years completed. Highest cumulative average in a cohort of 216. Departmental honors in econometrics. Nominated for a graduate fellowship in the fall of the final year. A withdrawal recorded that November with the notation hardship voluntary. "He was the best student in that department," Claire said, "and he left 3.5 years in because his mother was dying and the coverage stopped at a threshold nobody explained to him. That is the entire mystery of the missing 15 years. There is no other version and no one in this building thought to ask." Grant Hollis was reading the second page and had not turned it in some time. The references changed the temperature. One from a professor named Halloran, retired 6 years, who wrote that in 31 years of teaching he had recommended 4 students without reservation, and this was the 4th. One from a partner at a New York research firm who confirmed that an offer had been extended in 2009 and stated in writing that the firm had never filled the position with anyone better and had wondered for years what became of him. One from Walter Pruitt, general manager of a restaurant on the 22nd floor of a glass tower, 2 paragraphs about a man who had never once been late in 2 years and who had trained half the floor without being asked to. "I want to be precise about my own conduct," Claire said, because Peter's concern is legitimate, and I'm not going to dress it up. I recognized a former classmate in a restaurant in October. I told him a job was posted. He applied through the portal. He was interviewed by a panel I refused to sit on, and I did not see a score until after Grant had submitted his recommendation. She looked down the table. If this room believes even that was too much, I'll accept the finding. But I want the record to show what I did not do, which is put a thumb on any part of it. Peter Allman turned to the performance section without answering. 4 months. The middle market reconciliation delivered in 7 days against a 9-day deadline, clearing at 99.4% and identifying 16 positions double counted since the 2022 migration. The drawdown attribution, the client reporting rebuild, the stress test rerun, and the hedged position discrepancy in the second largest fund since corrected. One of the directors asked what the double counting had been worth. Vanessa Cole read the figure from the summary. The overstatement running through client reporting had exceeded $4 million, and it had been going out to investors unnoticed for nearly 3 years. It was the first number spoken in that room all morning that nobody wanted to discuss further. He is an analyst, paid below band 4 months on the floor, Claire said. In that time, he found the $4 million misstatement that 9 years of this department did not. He didn't find it because he's a genius. He found it because he was the only person willing to open the archived documentation instead of trusting the story everybody had agreed to tell about that system. So I'd like someone to explain the theory under which hiring him was the mistake. Blake Ferris said something about process mattering regardless of outcome, and it was true, and it landed on the table without weight. Then Grant Hollis spoke, and he was the last person in the room anyone expected to. I scored him first, Grant said. I want that on the record out loud because for 4 months I've let this floor believe otherwise by saying nothing. He closed the folder, and then I gave him the reconciliation to break him. 9 days for a job that takes 3 people a month. Everyone at this table who has run a team knows exactly what that assignment was. He turned it in on the 7th day, and it was the cleanest piece of work that has come out of my group in 2 years. And I said the word good and moved to the next agenda item because I was angry that the chief executive knew his name and hadn't told me. He looked at Peter Allman. The process question is yours to decide. The competence question I answered myself in December, and then I hid the answer for 4 months. That's the only misconduct in this file worth anyone's time. The vote came apart after that. Peter Allman stated for the record that his concern had been procedural and that the record satisfied it. 2 of the directors who had agreed with him asked instead that the compensation exception be revisited on the grounds that paying the man below band was itself a defect the firm should not have permitted. Someone laughed briefly, and the room let go. Elijah had not spoken once. He walked out with the folded letter still in his pocket, and he did not throw it away that day or that week. He put it in the drawer of his desk, and it stayed there for a long time. What followed was slower and less dramatic than the meeting, and it was the part that actually mattered. He did not explain himself to anyone. He was invited more than once to tell the story at a spring off-site at a happy hour by a colleague who meant well and said he should own it. He declined every time. He had learned something at the Aldridge that most of the 31st floor would never need to learn, which was that a man who keeps announcing what he is worth has already accepted the terms of the argument. So he did the work instead. He took the assignments nobody wanted the way he had in December, except now people noticed that he took them. He rebuilt the definitions layer for the entire credit book, which nobody had asked for, and which quietly ended 4 recurring arguments between teams. He was slow to speak in meetings and precise when he did, and by the end of the year, people had started routing questions to him before they routed them to Grant Hollis, which Grant permitted and eventually encouraged. Blake Ferris left the firm that fall for a competitor, and it was not a scandal. It was a man taking a title. Before he went, he sent a 2-line message saying the work had been good and that he had not made it easy. Elijah replied with 3 words and meant them. The promotion came 14 months after the board meeting. Grant Hollis wrote the recommendation himself and made a point of noting in it that he had spent a winter hoping the hire would fail because he wanted the record to contain both halves. Claire told him the rest of it 2 springs after the night at the restaurant in her office at the end of a review that had nothing to do with either of them personally. I want to tell you why I left the 0, she said. You asked me at Kessler's and I gave you the honest answer, which was that I had 90 seconds and I didn't think it through. That's still true. But I've had 2 years to think about the part underneath it, and I owe you the rest. Elijah waited. I had money in my hand at that table, $300 easily, and I would not have noticed it leaving my account. Claire turned her chair slightly toward the window. And I knew that if I put it down, that's what the night would have been. You'd have taken it, you'd have said thank you, and you would have been a man who got a large tip from a woman who felt something she couldn't name. I'd have driven home feeling generous. That's the whole transaction. It happens 10,000 times a night in this city, and it changes nothing for anyone. So you humiliated me instead. I did, and I'm not going to pretend the cost was mine. She looked back at him. But I couldn't buy my way out of that room. The only thing I could think to do was refuse to be a customer. If I left nothing on that line, then I wasn't a woman with money, and you weren't a man carrying plates. We were two people who used to sit in a library basement. I wanted to ask you a question as that person, and I didn't want an audience for it. Elijah did not answer for a while. You know what I actually thought, he said finally, when I opened it. Tell me. That somebody remembered the other version of me. I'd stopped believing there was a witness. He turned the pen on his knee once. I'd have taken the $300, Claire. I needed it that week. And you're right that I'd have taken it and gone home and nothing would have changed. She nodded slowly. I got back somebody I'd spent 15 years quietly admiring and had no way to repay. I got the harder thing, he said. I got asked to try again. In the summer, he went back to the Aldridge. He booked the corner window himself at 8 o'clock party of one, and he wore a jacket that fit and gave his own name to the host. Marcus Reed was still running the night shift and recognized him at the door and did the arithmetic in about 2 seconds, and to his credit, he did not perform anything. He shook Elijah's hand and said it was good to see him and seated him himself. Elijah asked after a few people. Danny Whitaker had left a year earlier for a place in River North. Walter Pruitt was in his office, and Elijah went back before service to thank him for the reference and for hiring a man with a decade of unexplainable years on his application, and Walter said he had read that application twice and had thought at the time that the years explained themselves fine. Nora Bennett was still at the expediting station. She came out from the pass when service slowed, wiping her hands on a towel, and stood at the edge of the table with the stillness of a woman who had about 2 minutes to spare. Told you, Nora said. You did. How is it, Hard, Elijah said. Good, both. He looked up at her. I came back to say something. That night in October, everybody in this building had an opinion about me, and you were the only one who said it to my face. I'd have talked myself out of all of it if you hadn't. She said that was the correct answer to a question she hadn't asked, and went back to her station, and he understood that she was not going to make more of it than that, and that this was the kindest thing about her. He ate the duck. When the check came, he wrote a number on the tip line larger than the bill, and he did not do it for the server, who was a young man he had never met, and he did not do it to make a point. He did it because he could, and because there had been 2 years of Thursdays when a number like that would have changed his month. Before he left, he stood a moment beside the table and looked at the white cloth where a folded slip of paper had once been pressed flat beneath the base of a dinner plate. He thought about what he had actually been given that night, and it was not a job. And it was not even a second chance, because a second chance is only paper until somebody picks it up. Claire Montgomery had told him a door was open, and he had said no. Nora Bennett had told him the truth, and he had heard it. He had ridden a train home 5 nights in a row and looked at a wall and eventually done the one thing nobody could do on his behalf, which was to type his own name into a public application form and walk into a building where 200 people were prepared to think the worst of him. The opportunity had been on the table since the moment he lifted the plate. What had been missing for 15 years and what he found in a 1-bedroom apartment on the west side at 2 in the morning with a radiator knocking was the nerve to reach for it after he had stopped believing he deserved to. He put on his jacket and walked out past the host stand where the same pad of notepaper still sat beside the reservation book, and he smiled once briefly in the elevator where nobody could see him. Do not measure a person by the work they are doing when you happen to find them. Circumstances can bury a talent for a very long time, but character and real ability will keep looking for a door. And sometimes all it takes is one honest message left where only the right person will find it to change the entire course of someone's life.